The Expedition X crew was forced to shut down their investigation deep inside an uncharted sector of the jungle. And what they found out there is something the world was never supposed to see. A discovery so disturbing that production immediately halted. Crew members were evacuated, and Josh Gates himself stepped in to confront what really happened. Tonight, we break down the full story. The audio, the thermal footage, the creature encounter, and the unexplainable event that nearly ended the entire Expedition X series. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, because once you hear what they uncovered, you'll understand why the jungle wanted them gone. The journey began long before the cameras started rolling. Josh Gates had been hearing whispers for years, cryptic tribal warnings, satellite anomalies, and a series of disappearances the locals refused to discuss. All of them centered around one isolated sector of jungle, known only by a name that didn't appear on any map: La Zona Prohibida, the Forbidden Zone. Expedition X had filmed in extreme places before: volcano rims, abandoned mines, haunted islands, but this request from the network felt different. It wasn't a mission they volunteered for. It was a mission the locals begged them not to take. Every guide turned them down instantly. Some refused to even speak the name of the region. Others warned that people who entered those trees often walked out a different person, if they walked out at all. Finally, one elderly guide agreed, but only after making them swear to rules that sounded more like survival rights than instruction. No splitting up, no loud talking, no bright lights after sundown, no whistling, and absolutely never turn around if they heard their own names whispered from behind. Even Josh, who thrived on the unknown, felt a pressure in his chest as they stepped beneath the dense canopy. The jungle swallowed every trace of the outside world. Sunlight dimmed to a dull green glow. Humidity thickened, and the temperature rose until every breath felt like steam. Within the first hour, things went wrong. Their GPS units flickered, compasses spun in slow circles, and the boom mic recorded a faint frequency no one could identify. The guide stopped in his tracks, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. He whispered, "It knows." Jess and Phil exchanged glances, uneasy, unsure. But this was Expedition X, and they weren't turning back. Not yet. Far ahead, something moved. Not an animal, not wind, something deliberate. And with that single motion, their investigation crossed a threshold they could never return from. The deeper the crew pushed into La Zona Prohibida, the more it felt like the jungle itself was shifting around them, tightening, listening, waiting. Jess noticed it first. She stopped mid-step, raising her hand for silence. Her eyes narrowed at the tree line. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Phil didn't. Josh didn't. But the guide did, his entire face drained of color. It wasn't the usual jungle chorus. No birds, no insects, not even the distant rustle of monkeys. It was the absence of sound that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. A silence so complete it felt engineered, manufactured, intentional. Jess raised her thermal camera toward the trees. At first, nothing. Then, a shape, a form, cold, motionless, tall, humanoid. It stood behind a curtain of vines, just far enough away that its outline flickered like a glitch on a corrupted file. Jess zoomed in. The shape tilted its head. "Is that a person?" Phil whispered, but the guide shook his head slowly, trembling. "Not a person. Not anymore." Before they could get closer, the air changed. A low vibration hummed through the ground, soft but unmistakable, as if something enormous was moving beneath the soil. Their equipment reacted instantly. EMF spikes across multiple devices, audio recorders capturing a deep, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat under rock. Then, the jungle exhaled. A sudden gust of wind blasted through the trees, bending branches backward as leaves spiraled around them. Equipment cases slammed shut. Cables whipped across the dirt. The thermal signature vanished in an instant, evaporating like steam. And then came the whistle, a soft, deliberate two-note sound from deep inside the foliage, mimicking the exact whistle Phil had used earlier to call Jess over to check the drone batteries. The guide spun around, eyes wild. "No whistling," he hissed. "I told you." It calls back. Josh called out, "Who's there? Come out." Silence. Then again, Phil's whistle, perfectly copied, but this time much closer. The crew froze. Something in that jungle wasn't just observing them. It was learning them, repeating them, studying them like prey. And the worst part was still ahead. After the whistles, the crew knew they needed eyes in the sky. If something, or someone, was stalking them, the drone was their only chance to see it. Without getting closer, Phil powered it up, but even that didn't go smoothly. The drone's calibration kept failing, warning sensors flickering between obstacle detected and GPS interference. Still, after several resets, the machine finally lifted through the canopy. The moment it broke above the tree line, Phil's expression shifted from relief to confusion. "Guys, something's wrong with the horizon." Josh stepped beside him. Instead of the lush, uninterrupted jungle they expected, the drone camera showed something impossible. An enormous, perfect circle carved directly into the forest floor. No trees, no brush. Just an exposed ring of earth about 200 feet wide. Too smooth to be natural. Too old to be recent. Jess zoomed in. Her breath caught. In the center of the clearing was a network of symbols etched into the soil. Spirals, intersecting lines, geometric shapes that didn't match any indigenous markings they had studied. Some glowed faintly on thermal, radiating heat despite no visible fire or machinery. "How long has that been here?" she whispered. Phil nudged the drone lower. As he did, the audio feed began picking up a strange static, like whispering wrapped in distortion. Not voices, but patterns, almost coded. The symbols grew clearer. The team could see deep grooves, like they had been carved with precision tool. But by who? And why in a place so remote that even the maps avoided it? Then, movement. The drone caught a distortion at the edge of the circle. Not a body, not an animal, a shimmer. Like heat mirage bending the light around a shape that wasn't fully visible. It pulsed once, then darted behind the trees with unnatural speed. "What was that?" Jess gasped. Phil tried to pull the drone back up, but the screen glitched, then warped, then ripened into a violent cascade of static as something slammed into the drone mid-air. The final frame captured a blurred silhouette, long, thin limbs, a reflective sheen across its surface. And then the feed died. The drone spiraled into the trees with a bone-cracking crash, and the jungle went silent again, as if waiting to see what the crew would do next. After the drone fell, Josh made the call no one wanted to hear. "We're retrieving it. Whatever hit that drone, we need to know what it was." The team pushed deeper into the jungle, following Phil's tracker. The humidity thickened until every breath felt weighted. Jess kept scanning the trees with her thermal imager, but the screen kept glitching, heat signatures flaring and vanishing like something was darting between the branches, too fast for the eye to catch. When they finally reached the crash site, the drone was crumpled in a bed of leaves. Its casing split open, its lens cracked inward, but the way it was damaged didn't match a fall. The metal was indented outward, like something had gripped it mid-flight and crushed it before dropping it. Josh crouched, running his fingers over the warped shell. "This wasn't an animal," he whispered. Phil didn't answer. He already knew. Then Jess called out softly, "Guys, you're going to want to see this." Just beyond the crash site, the jungle floor dropped into a shallow basin. Vines and moss had grown over the edges, but the shape was unmistakable. A man-made depression, nearly symmetrical. As they stepped down into it, the air felt noticeably colder. Unnaturally, impossibly colder. In the center was a stone platform, not a ruin, not debris, a constructed altar, its edges carved with careful precision. The stone was dark, almost metallic, and bore markings identical to the symbols they saw from the drone. Spirals, intersecting angles, and geometric shapes that didn't match any indigenous databases. "What is this doing out here?" Jess asked, voice trembling. Josh touched the stone's surface. It vibrated, subtle but unmistakable, like a low-frequency hum pulsing from deep within. Not mechanical, not natural, something else. Phil pointed to the ground. Large tracks, humanoid but wrong, surrounded the altar. Not footprints exactly, more like where something had pressed into the soil with weight, but without toes, arches, or heel marks. Smooth, uniform, almost molded. Jess tapped her radio. "We should report this to command. This isn't just archaeology. This is—" Her voice cut off as the radios erupted with the same distorted whispering the drone captured. The signals swirled in their earpieces like mechanical breaths layered over distant speech. Josh slowly removed his earpiece. "They don't want us calling this in," he said quietly. The jungle, dense and watchful, seemed to close in around them, pressing, listening, as if the ritual site had been disturbed for the first time in decades, and something near it had finally awakened. The team backed away from the altar, trying to regroup, but the atmosphere had changed. The constant hum of insects, the ever-present background music of the jungle, had stopped entirely. No birds, no buzzing, no rustling, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. Jess whispered, "This is wrong. The jungle never goes silent." Josh lifted his camcorder, scanning the tree line. The foliage looked normal, but every instinct in his body screamed that they were being watched. Phil stepped ahead, his machete raised slightly, not as a weapon, but to feel the vibrations in the air. He could sense it too. Something was moving, but not through the brush above them. A faint clicking noise echoed from the canopy. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Not an animal, not mechanical, something in between. Jess aimed her thermal imager upward, but the screen immediately fractured into static before freezing on a single warped image. A tall, elongated silhouette crouched against a tree trunk, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then the screen went black. Josh's heartbeat hammered in his chest. "We're not alone out here," he said, barely audible. Suddenly, a crash erupted behind them. Branches snapped violently, as if something enormous had leapt from tree to tree. Phil spun so fast his pack nearly tore off. Jess raised her flashlight just in time to catch a streak of movement. Something long, dark, and disturbingly smooth disappearing behind the vines. They bolted. Josh led the way up the slope, but halfway up he froze, raising a hand to stop the others. On the ground ahead of them lay a trail of disturbed soil, like something had been dragging itself or being dragged toward a narrow tunnel-like opening hidden beneath a lattice of roots. Phil crouched and brushed away the leaves. The opening led underground, extending deeper than the beam of his flashlight could penetrate. Jess whispered, "Is that fresh?" It was. The earth was still wet, still warm. Before they could decide whether to investigate, the clicking sound returned, louder now, and coming from inside the tunnel. Phil jerked back instantly. "Nope, no way. That thing is down there." But then, from deeper inside the underground passage, a sound drifted out, low, guttural, almost human, like someone calling for help. Jess stepped forward. It sounded like, "No," Josh said sharply. "That isn't a person." The voice came again, closer. This time, it whispered Josh's name. Josh stumbled backward the moment he heard his own name echo from inside the tunnel. The voice was low, wavering, and carried a strange distortion, like it was being forced through layers of stone. Jess immediately swung her flashlight toward the opening, her breath trembling. Phil raised his machete instinctively, eyes locked on the darkness. "Josh, help!" The voice came again, this time unmistakably familiar. Jess gasped. That sounded like the missing ranger, the one they said vanished last month. Josh didn't answer. Every rational part of him knew it made no sense, but the emotional reaction hit hard. He had interviewed that ranger's family. He remembered the voice, the cadence, the tone. This wasn't it? Not exactly. It was close, but wrong in subtle ways, like a recording played through damaged speakers. Phil crouched low, studying the tunnel. This is mimicry. Nothing human moves like that, or sounds like that. His voice cracked with unease. Even he, the skeptic, was shaken. The jungle wind picked up suddenly, but the leaves around them barely moved. It was as if the air itself was being pulled toward the tunnel's mouth. Jess held out her hand and felt a faint suction, a slow inhale coming from the subterranean passage. Something down there was breathing. Jess whispered, "We need to back away. Now." Josh nodded, but before they could retreat, a thin sliver of movement appeared in the tunnel, pale, bending, almost jointless. It looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long, too smooth. They moved independently, curling into the dirt like roots seeking water. Then the voice shifted, not pleading, commanding. "Come down! Come! See!" Phil grabbed Josh by the collar and yanked him back just as the fingers pressed further out of the darkness darkness, dragging lines in the soil like they were testing it. Jess aimed her thermal camera again. It flickered violently, then locked onto a shape, something tall, thin, standing upright, just beyond the flashlight's reach. But the thermal signature was backwards. The coldest part was its center, while the outer edges glowed like heat was radiating away from the body instead of through it. "What is that?" she whispered. A sharp crack rang out behind them, something moving fast through the branches above. The creature in the tunnel jerked back instantly, retreating with inhuman speed. The clicking sound returned, rippling through the trees in a pattern, almost like a warning. Phil whispered, "We're being surrounded." That wasn't the only one. They turned to run, and the jungle lit up with glowing eyes. Jess froze first, her flashlight trembling as she slowly scanned the trees. One by one, small reflective eyes winked into existence, dozens of them, hovering between the branches, low to the ground, up high, scattered in every direction. They didn't blink like animals. They didn't sway with the wind. They stayed perfectly still, as if each pair were painted onto the night itself. Phil whispered, "Those aren't animals. Animals move." Josh swallowed hard. Are they watching us or waiting for us? The clicking sound intensified, spreading through the canopy like invisible chains snapping in sequence, each one closer than the last. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, intention. Jess held up her audio recorder, and the software struggled to process the layers of frequencies, producing only jittering, corrupted waveforms. "Something's communicating," she said, "but not with us, with each other." Leaves rustled overhead. Phil looked up, and his face drained of color. "Josh, they're above us!" Josh aimed his light upward and saw elongated silhouettes clinging to the branches like giant, malformed insects. Their limbs were wrong, too many joints, too much flexibility, and their skin, though pale, shimmered like something wet beneath tree bark. One of the creatures shifted its head, and its eyes caught their lights again, reflective, empty, almost metallic. Jess whispered, "We need to move, now!" They backed away slowly, trying not to disturb the forest floor, but with every step, the eyes followed, unblinking. The clicking stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, a deep vibration rolled under their feet as if something massive had shifted underground. Birds shot from the trees in a panicked wave. The foliage to the left exploded in motion as an enormous shadow darted between trunks, faster than anything that size should move. Jess screamed, "Go!" They ran, branches whipping across their faces, roots tripping their boots, the jungle closing in like it wanted to swallow them whole. Phil tried to keep his bearings, but the terrain twisted unnaturally. Trails they had walked earlier suddenly gone or rearranged. Josh looked back once and instantly wished he hadn't. One of the creatures was moving through the trees parallel to them, its limbs stretching unnaturally wide before snapping forward like a spider diving toward prey. Its skin wasn't pale anymore. It was glowing faintly, blue, like static electricity building in a storm. Phil shouted, "Left! The river! Go to the river!" Branches cracked behind them, heavy footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal. The eyes in the trees vanished all at once, as if something larger had stepped into their view, blotting out everything. Josh could feel it now. They weren't being hunted by multiple creatures. They were being herded toward something waiting ahead. The jungle opened into a clearing so suddenly that the Expedition X crew nearly stumbled into the river before realizing something was wrong. The water wasn't flowing. It lay perfectly still, smooth, black, and reflective like a sheet of polished obsidian. Even the moon's reflection looked distorted, bending and twisting as if the river itself were rejecting the light. Jess stepped back immediately. Rivers don't do that, not naturally. Josh tapped the surface with the end of his machete. A jolt of cold vibrated up the metal into his arm, sharp enough to make him gasp. Phil grabbed him. "Don't touch it! Not again!" Then the clicking began, not scattered, not random. A single, deliberate pattern coming from deep inside the jungle. Each click echoed with equal spacing, almost like a coded pulse traveling through the tree. The hair on Jess's arms lifted. It's signaling something. A shape stepped out of the foliage. Tall, too tall. Its outline flickered like heat haze, as though the creature's body interfered with the air around it. When Jess raised her flashlight, the beam bent around the figure instead of landing on it, as if the creature existed in a place the light couldn't reach. Josh whispered, "That's not possible." The creature tilted its head, studying them with an intelligence that felt old, older than the jungle itself. The clicking stopped. The hum began. A low, bone-deep vibration rolled across the clearing, strong enough to make Phil's camera glitch in his hands. The screen filled with static and warped pixels. Jess shouted, "It's affecting the electronics!" Vines behind them suddenly twisted together, sealing off the path they came from. The forest itself was moving, trapping them. Josh grabbed their arms. "Go! The other way!" But the creature stepped forward, blocking the river. Its body pulsed with dim, blue-white strands that moved under its skin like flowing circuits. The hum grew louder, stronger. Jess buckled to one knee. Phil's camera fell to the ground, still recording, until the lens cracked on its own and shut off. Then, silence. The creature raised one long arm and pointed at the broken camera before vanishing in a sudden gust of wind that sent leaves spiraling. When Phil lunged for the camera, it was gone. "It took it," he whispered. "It didn't want proof." A moment later, the vines behind them unwound, revealing a narrow escape path. They didn't question it. They ran. Back at camp, the producers saw their faces, white, shaking, unable to speak, and shut down the shoot at sunrise. Every recording device malfunctioned, every battery drained. 2 weeks later, Phil received a package with no return address. Inside was his missing camera. Every file was wiped clean, except one, a 3-second clip of the motionless river, with a tall, luminous figure reflected in the water, staring back. Jessica Chobot was one of the driving forces behind Expedition X, bringing energy, mystery, and fearless investigation into the unknown. Fans believed she would be part of the team forever, but without warning, she stepped away. No big announcement, no explanation, only silence. Now, disturbing details are emerging from people close to production. What really happened behind the scenes? Tonight, we uncover the truth about Jessica's departure and the shocking reason the show may have crossed a line no one was prepared for. Before her exit became the subject of speculation and quiet industry conversations, Jessica Chobot was the pulse of Expedition X. She wasn't there just to narrate events or fill screen time. She shaped the identity of the show. Viewers trusted her because she brought something few investigators could: real curiosity and a calm willingness to walk into places that others refused. From day one, her role went beyond hosting. She acted as the voice of reason while still pushing forward into high-risk encounters, grounding each investigation with science-backed questions. While Phil Torres broke down data and patterns, Jessica humanized the search for answers, asking what ordinary people feared but never dared to speak publicly. Her background made her stand out. Before Expedition X, she spent years in investigative entertainment and story development, exploring the blurred line between fact and speculation. Her on-screen composure earned her respect from crew members who described her as the investigator who stayed last when everyone else packed up. Multiple production notes reveal that during Season 1, she was the only cast member to review 100% of post-investigation recordings personally. Even the uncut footage the network never aired. She often stayed in the command trailer long after others wrapped, replaying audio anomalies and unexplained radio bursts, frame by frame. According to one assistant producer, Jessica asked the kind of questions that could derail a narrative if answered truthfully, questions that made executives nervous. And that became part of the problem. Her dedication to uncovering whatever was actually happening, outside what could be marketed or packaged, made her indispensable, but also increasingly at odds with the show's evolving tone. As the series gained popularity, pressure increased to amplify the spectacle. Jessica remained committed to reality. She wanted truth, even if the truth didn't fit the script. Her value came from authenticity. Ironically, that authenticity may be what ultimately led her straight toward the breaking point. As Expedition X advanced in popularity, production began shifting. Episodes needed heightened stakes, faster pacing, and more dramatic moments to compete with other paranormal and expedition-style shows. What started as a truth-forward investigative series gradually leaned toward entertainment, something viewers never saw coming. According to confidential post-production notes and off-record crew accounts, Jessica Chobot began quietly resisting these changes. She believed Expedition X was losing what made it unique, its grounding in real investigation over exaggerated spectacle. Behind the cameras, conversations reportedly grew tense. Producers pushed for more reaction-based footage, while Jessica pushed back, arguing that authentic reactions shouldn't be manufactured. According to a crew member present during the Season 3 strategy meetings, Jessica flatly refused to reenact moments that did not occur naturally during filming. She is quoted saying, "If we start pretending, we're not exploring anymore, we're just performing." As ratings pressure grew, so did the distance between what she felt was right and what executives wanted delivered. Even field operations were affected. Multiple crew members confirmed that in certain high-risk investigations, Jessica questioned why the team was being pushed deeper or staying longer solely for potential dramatic payoff. She expressed concerns about safety standards being adjusted for screen tension. One field tech later disclosed she was the only one who stopped and asked whether we should go in, not just whether we could. That didn't sit well with people focused on the numbers rather than survival. Rumors began circulating that something more was bothering her. She would appear completely calm on camera, but off-screen became noticeably withdrawn before episodes involving intense or questionable investigative setup. She developed a habit of reviewing every safety protocol herself, often rechecking equipment without prompting. One crew member described it as someone preparing not just for an investigation, but for impact. The tension escalated when Jessica began raising direct concerns during executive review calls. She insisted that several anomalies shown publicly were misleading due to selective editing. The more she spoke up, the more isolated she became within the leadership structure. This wasn't just creative disagreement, it was the start of a revelation she was never supposed to share. According to multiple insider accounts, the breaking point began during the filming of an episode deep in the Pacific Northwest, one that was never aired in its original form. The team had traveled to investigate reported hauntings and electromagnetic disturbances linked to abandoned Cold War-era tunnels. The location had a history of structural collapses and unstable power sources, but executives reportedly pushed for extended filming after initial readings failed to produce dramatic results. Jessica argued strongly against pushing the team deeper, citing physical danger and lack of emergency support. Her concerns were dismissed as overly cautious. That night, the monitoring equipment began registering extreme magnetic fluctuation. Unlike previous investigations, these readings didn't match typical geological interference. Crew members reported sudden interference on radios, unexplained nausea, and what one technician described as the sensation of pressure all around us, like being underwater without drowning. Footage from the thermal camera, according to sources familiar with the uncut files, captured a moving distortion that could not be matched to any environmental source. Jessica insisted the team pull out and review the data before continuing. Production reportedly pushed to keep rolling. Moments later, a lighting rig collapsed. While no one sustained severe injury, 2 crew members were treated for dizziness and minor trauma. Chobot was said to be the first to respond, helping stabilize equipment and calling for immediate extraction. Official production logs labeled the incident as weather-related malfunction, but crew on-site claimed the air was perfectly still. It wasn't just the physical incident that shifted her perspective. It was what she saw in the unedited footage later that night. Sources say she stayed alone reviewing the thermal imaging, noticing something moving in sync with the equipment failure. She reportedly wrote in a field journal entry, "If this is real, we should not be here. If it's not, someone wants us to believe it is." Either possibility was disturbing. The next morning, she confronted production staff about altering the narrative of what happened. She argued that the episode should either be scrapped or presented exactly as it occurred, including crew risk. Executives refused. That was the moment, according to insiders, that Jessica made her decision. She wasn't just questioning safety anymore, She was questioning whether the truth was being deliberately compromised, and from that moment forward, the clock began ticking on her departure from Expedition X. After the tunnel incident, Jessica Chobot pushed for a full internal review of both the safety protocols and the narrative structure of the show. She insisted that the thermal footage, the strange physiological symptoms experienced by the crew, and the raw audio anomalies all be preserved as is. But when rough cuts for the episode began to circulate, she discovered that pivotal moments had been strategically removed. The unexplained fluctuation in equipment readings was trimmed to appear inconclusive. Crew reactions to the pressure event were shortened and repackaged as brief equipment malfunction. Entire audio segments, where Jessica openly expressed concern about an immediate evacuation, were cut completely. According to one post-production specialist who remained anonymous, Jessica showed up at the editing room unannounced, requesting to review cut logs. What she saw left her stunned. In the metadata, timestamps indicated that footage had been flagged for removal even before the final team debrief. Internal notations reportedly labeled these clips as overly alarming, non-usable, and potentially damaging to series tone. Some of the distortions caught on thermal were said to be set aside for secondary analysis, but never resurfaced. It was as if the truth was archived, said the specialist quietly. Not erased, just buried. When she brought the issue up in the following production meeting, her concerns were dismissed as unnecessary escalation. Executives allegedly argued that showing the incident in full could make the network look irresponsible or foster fear among viewers. Jessica's counterpoint struck a nerve. If what we're investigating is real, downplaying it is a lie. If it's not real, and we act like it is, that's worse. Her words reportedly caused a long silence across the conference line. From that moment on, she was not just seen as cautious, but as a risk. Several crew members later confirmed that future scripts began subtly reducing her airtime during analytical segments. She was instructed to focus more on narration, while Phil Torres handled data-driven clarification. This restructuring was interpreted by some as an attempt to control how much of her skepticism made it onto camera. Word began spreading internally. Jessica was becoming too factual, too serious, and not in line with evolving direction. Behind closed doors, it was called a style shift, but according to those closest to her, she recognized it as something far more worrying. An effort to soften reality. She didn't leave because she stopped believing in the investigation. She left because the show stopped believing in the truth. In the months that followed the tunnel incident, the divide between Jessica Chobot and upper production widened beyond creative differences. According to internal messages referenced by a crew member, she repeatedly pushed for more transparency regarding field risks and for documentation to reflect the reality of what crews endured during extreme investigations. She warned that failure to report situations accurately could result in serious injury, or worse. Those concerns were quietly acknowledged but ultimately minimized for being overcautious and disruptive to episode pacing. Then something changed. Her concerns stopped being about filming and started focusing on people. While reviewing upcoming expedition plans for a season finale episode supposedly centered around airborne luminescent phenomena in an uninhabited region of the Arctic Circle, she noticed serious safety compromises. The location was listed as mostly stable, yet the latest geological assessments noted deep fracturing beneath the ice shelf, unstable satellite communication zones, and high electromagnetic interference readings. Jessica flagged the excursion as a red-level risk. The response from leadership shocked her. One executive replied that heightened risk equals heightened viewership. That answer deeply disturbed her. She began privately confiding in close colleagues that the push for more dangerous footage had crossed a line. One crew medic later disclosed that during a routine equipment inspection, Jessica approached him and asked, "How long do we have to flatten a rescue if something happens out there?" Not in theory, in real time. How many minutes? When he answered, "Under optimal conditions, maybe 20, she reportedly responded with a single sentence, "The danger is not theoretical anymore." Weeks later, anonymous crew members claim Jessica started receiving brief, subtle administrative notes questioning her commitment to the show's vision. At first, simple reminders. Later, veiled phrasing about professional alignment and consistency with series objectives. To outsiders, it sounded harmless. To those familiar with production language, it was a warning. Then, it escalated. Ahead of a mid-season promotional shoot, Jessica was instructed to downplay prior concerns on camera and avoid addressing safety or authenticity-related issues in interviews. She pushed back, calmly but firmly. She wanted to talk about the importance of respecting both the history of paranormal inquiry and the people behind it. Reportedly, she was told that those themes were not currently a performance priority. That was when it became clear. Not only were her warnings being ignored, they were being actively suppressed. And once her advocacy for crew safety began interfering with planned expeditions, the internal stance shifted from disagreement to containment. For Jessica, that was no longer a creative difference. That was a line drawn in the sand. It didn't happen in a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no ultimatums. The moment Jessica Chobot truly decided she couldn't stay on Expedition X came during a routine prep briefing at the Los Angeles production office. The team was reviewing logistics for the next major shoot, a multi-week investigation in a remote mountainous region where locals claimed unexplained ground tremors were linked to an abandoned Cold War communications facility. Jessica had already flagged concerns about seismic instability in the area, citing a recent geological survey that warned of potential structural collapse inside the facility. She also pushed for additional personnel, a second medic, a thermal imaging technician, and another safety coordinator. The production reply came back with a single line: "Budget won't support additional redundancy. Team must operate lean." During the briefing, one producer suggested using drones and remote cameras to avoid unnecessary entry into dangerous areas. Jessica agreed. But then another senior figure shut it down in front of everyone, saying, "It won't cut well for episode energy. We need real human proximity to the activity." Those in the room described that the air went still. Jessica didn't argue. She simply stared across the table for a moment, then slowly leaned forward and asked, "At what point does energy outweigh survival?" According to an insider, no one responded. Later that night, Jessica returned to her hotel and began quietly organizing essential files: early treatment documents, unreleased field reports, private notes from key investigations. She left a message for a high-level network liaison expressing her decision to pause involvement pending a full review of safety protocol and content approach. 2 days later, during an informal call, she made it official. She would step away from filming. She didn't give a dramatic speech. She simply said she could no longer stand behind an environment where verification and risk calculation were seen as obstacles rather than necessities. That call wasn't widely publicized, but internally, it landed like a seismic shift. Some crew members reportedly cried. Others, who had quietly raised similar concerns but felt powerless, described it as the moment someone finally stood up. A production assistant later recalled Jessica telling him, "There's bravery in chasing answers, but there's also bravery in refusing to ignore consequences." Shortly after, Jessica's departure was labeled a creative transition in public statements. But those who were there know better. She didn't walk away because she lost interest. She walked away because the mission changed. And the part of that mission she believed in, truth, caution, respect for forces we don't fully understand, was no longer driving the show's direction. Jessica Chobot didn't speak publicly right away. When her departure was first announced, headlines framed it as a career reprioritization or a shift toward new media ventures. The official press line said she was focusing on creative development, but people who worked alongside her say that behind the silence was something heavier, something she struggled with long after stepping away. It wasn't the physical risks alone that pushed her out. It was the direction investigations were taking and how far the production was increasingly willing to go to capture something, even when there was nothing left to capture safely. According to one editor who worked worked on late-season episodes, Jessica began pushing back against what she called pattern forcing. She noticed that sometimes, when field data didn't support the narrative the team expected, conversations would subtly shift toward filming more speculation than verification. She reportedly told a producer, "We are not supposed to create mystery. We are supposed to explore it." The response she got wasn't hostile, but it wasn't supportive either. It was neutral. The audience wants closure. In private, she described frustration with how post-production occasionally reshaped events. Instances where equipment malfunction was labeled as unexplained force. A night where wind rattled a door frame, but was edited to seem like intentional movement. Nothing fabricated outright, but just enough assisted ambiguity, as one crew member put it, to make the episode lean toward suspense over science. What troubled Jessica most wasn't dishonesty, it was the momentum behind it. Ratings pressure led decision-makers to push the boundaries of what qualified as evidence. In one internal review meeting, she questioned whether they were truly documenting phenomena or unintentionally dramatizing fear. The room reportedly went quiet before someone said, "It depends how you define documentation." That moment stuck with her, because to her, the definition hadn't changed. Following this, Jessica began consulting outside experts privately to confirm whether her observations aligned with responsible investigative practice. The consensus was clear. If hesitation exists due to ethics or safety, pause. Otherwise, you're not investigating, you're simply producing. That was the point she couldn't ignore. It wasn't that things got too strange, it was that things stopped being strange for the right reasons. She didn't leave because she was afraid of the unknown. She left because she was afraid of what would happen if they pretended to know more than they did. For months after leaving Expedition X, Jessica Chobot remained quiet. She didn't want her departure to ignite controversy or damage the show's legacy. She respected her colleagues, acknowledged the skill behind the production, and believed many people involved still cared about doing things right. But as rumors began circulating, claims that she'd left due to drama, arguments, or losing interest, she agreed to privately address a small group of industry insiders. What she revealed was simple, calm, and unsettling. She explained that there was a moment during one of their final shoots, a nighttime investigation in a structurally compromised mining complex, when camera operators were positioning inside a corridor that local experts had red-flagged due to collapse risk. She requested the team regroup outside until daylight. Instead, executives pushed to get just a few usable shots. While nothing catastrophic happened, a large sheet of metal dropped from overhead support minutes later, narrowly missing a crew member by less than 3 feet. She described the sound as the wake-up call I had been ignoring. It wasn't paranormal that nearly caused harm, it was negligence. She didn't name names. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but she made it very clear. Excellence in exploration cannot exist without responsibility, and when that responsibility is traded for shock value, even subtlety, the mission dilutes into spectacle. Her closing statement reportedly stunned the room. "We don't chase answers to create fear. We chase answers because fear is often the first sign there's something worth understanding." Since then, insiders say Jessica has been quietly consulting on responsible production guidelines for high-risk nonfiction programming. She hasn't ruled out returning to TV, but only if the format prioritizes reality over dramatization, safety over spectacle, and truth over trend. She isn't exposing Expedition X to tear it down. She's reminding future explorers what happens when the mystery becomes more important than the people chasing it. And that, according to those closest to the show, is the real reason Jessica Chobot walked away. Moments ago, breaking reports circulated that an Expedition X crew member was rushed to the hospital following a horrifying incident during an episode that was never allowed to air. According to internal sources, filming was underway at a remote research location when something unseen triggered a severe medical emergency, forcing production to halt instantly. Josh Gates and the team reportedly watched it unfold in real time, but no footage was ever broadcast. Tonight, we're uncovering what really happened during the uncut expedition that nearly ended the show for good. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. Production records show the episode was set to investigate a location kept confidential even within expedition planning notes, referred to only as Zone 9. This place had been originally rejected by network standard protocols due to past incidents involving severe equipment loss and unexplained sensor shutdowns. But on this particular trip, producers believed they had new protective monitoring systems in place, and everything seemed safe. Josh Gates approved the segment after receiving clearance from an outside consultant, someone reportedly experienced in crisis management for high-risk field operation. That consultant later refused to comment when contacted. The mission objective was simple: detect environmental anomalies during a nocturnal atmospheric shift. Jessica Chobot and Phil Torres were scheduled to begin initial setup, while the rest of the team handled power routing to location beacons. The raw script described this as a standard recon before thermal mapping, but from the very moment the team arrived, nothing felt standard. According to the audio notes recovered from a secondary recorder, Jessica can be heard whispering that the air felt heavier than normal, comparing it to walking into a room right after someone had been screaming. At exactly 22:14 local time, long before filming officially began, 2 drone feeds suffered what appeared to be forced directional failure. Neither crashed, but both turned 180 degrees toward the tree line on their own. Crew attempted a manual override and received the same invalid input error twice. Production assumed it was a signal bounce and pushed forward, unaware a pressure drop had already begun across the site. The ground temperature fell in 6-degree steps at precisely 2-minute interval, as if following something artificial rather than natural. Despite this, Phil motivated the team onward, telling them sudden environmental changes often meant they were close to something big. Those words are now chilling in hindsight, because within the next 40 minutes, the team would realize this was not the start of a discovery. This was the start of something trying to discover them. What makes this incident stand out compared to other Expedition X investigations isn't just what happened, it's how quickly the situation derailed while still appearing completely calm to the naked eye. At 22:37, Jessica and Phil conducted a basic area sweep with thermal imaging. According to the pre-release field notes, heat signatures were normal, no animals nearby, no heat leaks from underground, and no visible structures other than the mobile base tent. Yet, the audio capture shows Jessica pausing mid-sentence and asking, "Are you hearing that? Because I don't know what I'm hearing." The sound logs reveal nothing abnormal. Her microphone didn't pick anything up. Seconds later, a motion alert triggered on camera 3 near the tree line, positioned roughly 20 yards from the monitoring tent. The recorded visual showed branches bending as if something large passed through. But the thermal overlay indicated no biological heat source, meaning whatever disturbed the vegetation had no identifiable body temperature. Phil initially wrote it off as air pressure change, citing that wind speeds had climbed. But that explanation quickly fell apart when a simultaneous sensor spike registered on the opposite side of the clearing, far from any wind exposure. Then the team noticed something no one could immediately explain. The live biometrics feed from one crew member showed an abrupt heart rate acceleration, jumping from 72 to 121 in under 3 seconds, despite him standing still and showing no outward signs of panic. He later claimed he felt like someone was standing directly behind him, breathing. In post-analysis, that same biometric feed displayed duplicate timestamps, identical minute and second entries with different heart rate values, an impossible data anomaly, suggesting the equipment was either malfunctioning or that environmental interference affected time tracking. The crew laughed it off at the moment, unaware that this was the first clear sign the expedition would not just fail, it would leave someone seriously injured before sunrise. The turning point came at 23:04. Not with something seen or heard, but with something felt. The monitoring tent suddenly experienced a pressure shift strong enough to visibly flex the fabric walls inward. Recorded on the exterior cameras, but notably not detected on any barometric sensor, Phil, frustrated and convinced it was structural instability, radioed the rest of the team to regroup and begin recalibrating their instruments. That's when the EM tracker began pulsing erratically, cycling between peak readings and total power loss every 4 seconds. The fluctuation was so extreme that wires began vibrating across the floor, as if responding to a rhythmic force. Crew member Daniel, responsible for stabilization checks, knelt to disconnect the power feed. Witnesses stated he recoiled instantly, gasping that the cable was burning cold. Forensics later confirmed the temperature reading was -12 degrees Fahrenheit, even though the rest of the tent remained at 61 degrees. Seconds after that contact, Camera 3, the same unit that had previously predicted motion without heat, completely detached from its fixed mount and dropped to the ground. The metal ring holding it in place snapped clean, not bent or stripped. A playback review later showed that just before the fall, a frame appeared where the camera's lens reflection caught a shape, tall and narrow, with no clearly defined movement. One technician, during review, muted the audio halfway through the recording, claiming he could faintly hear something breathing inside the feed. Then came the crew member collapse. Daniel, who had handled the frozen cable, staggered back, clutched his chest, and dropped to one knee. His heart rate surged past 160. The transmission log noted his last coherent statement before blacking out. "It's like it knows I'm here." For the first time in Expedition X history, the crew called for an emergency extraction signal, something reserved for catastrophic site failure. They thought that would be the end of it, but it was only the beginning. The emergency extraction alert activated at 23:09, triggering a protocol usually reserved for physical injury or environmental hazard. A secondary crew positioned half a mile west moved in for recovery. By then, Daniel's vitals were crashing. He was pale, cold to the touch, and murmuring incoherently. His oxygen saturation dropped to 68%. Critical failure level. Phil ordered all equipment abandoned except the primary data drives and instructed everyone to regroup at Vehicle Point Delta. But the path to the extraction zone was not clear. As they moved across uneven forest terrain, the air began to carry a faint metallic hum, the same fluctuating EM pattern recorded earlier, but now audible without instruments. Crew member Marissa reported a sensation of static running along her spine, followed by tingling in her fingertips. Phil began calling out distances over radio, trying to maintain formation, but half of his words cut off mid-transmission, replaced by a crackling tone that sounded disturbingly rhythmic, almost like slow inhaling. Then the radio battery packs began to fail, one by one, even though they were at full charge when the team departed. Tablet screens glitched, GPS repositioning them in places they were not physically located. It was as if their equipment believed they were still standing near the hotspot. Panic crept in. The forest around them remained physically unchanged, yet the path seemed to subtly misalign every time they looked back. At one point, the camera operator swore the trees had shifted position, like the landscape itself was trying to gently push them back toward the original site. Footsteps began to appear in the damp soil beside their route, fresh prints, 11 inches long, human-like but narrow, emerging parallel to theirs without anyone present. They were too deep to belong to any crew member. One technician attempted to snap a photo, but the image capture froze at 99% compression and then erased itself. Phil halted the group just 30 yards from Vehicle Point Delta as a sudden realization overtook them. They were no longer walking alone. Something unseen had aligned itself behind them, pacing their movements with impossible precision. And Daniel, still barely conscious, whispered one final phrase before collapsing into complete unresponsiveness. "It followed us." By 23:26, the crew finally reached Vehicle Point Delta, two rugged expedition trucks reinforced specifically for emergency retreats. Daniel was placed carefully across the back seat, while EMT protocol crew began a stabilized transport setup. He remained unresponsive, clinging to life with labored breaths and uncontrolled tremors. Everyone expected that once inside the protective shielding of the vehicles, the phenomenon would cease. Instead, for the first time that night, they realized the problem had changed shape. The moment the trucks powered on, a pulsing distortion appeared across the center screen of the vehicle's dash monitor. It wasn't part of their surveillance system. It was an internal system glitch. The distortion flickered into what looked like fragments of earlier camera footage. Frames from their abandoned camp appeared, overlaid with topographic grid lines that did not match any terrain they had crossed. It wasn't recorded. It was being generated in real time. Marissa quickly disconnected the external drives, fearing live contamination, but the pulse continued through vehicle software. Even the secondary ignition computer stalled for 3 seconds, displaying a single corrupted file name, docrep-v2 retry. The file didn't exist in storage logs. It was coming from memory systems that never touched field hardware. One by one, their digital panels began relaying unprompted data, audio clips of their own voices captured during previous expeditions, yet subtly wrong. In one clip, Phil's voice asked if the subject was stable, a phrase he never spoke. In another, Daniel's voice whispered, "It already knows what we think." He had never said that out loud. Further disturbance came when emergency telemetry in Truck 2 began rapidly replaying crew biometrics with latency, as if reading signals from several minutes in the future. Daniel's vitals displayed a pulse rate sharply decreasing before EMT sensors detected it. This preemptive reading proved horrifyingly accurate 7 minutes later. Phil made the call. No more electronics. The trucks went into manual override. All data drives were isolated inside Faraday bags. But as they sped toward base camp, quieter but no less alarming anomalies continued. The radio chirped spontaneously, not with static, but with breathing, slow, deliberate, patterned. Only then did Marissa mutter what no one wanted to admit. "It's not stuck in the hot spot. It's traveling with us." Daniel arrived at St. Francis Regional at 1:14 under priority intake. Listed as a neurological trauma patient, the ER team expected hypothermia or exposure to environmental toxins. What they encountered instead forced them to initiate a report deemed abnormal sensory distress, cause undetermined. The first red flag appeared during preliminary vitals. Daniel's pulse, previously irregular, stabilized to a calm rhythm, only to spike erratically whenever someone came within 3 feet of his bed. Nearly every nurse and technician experienced momentary disorientation when approaching. One reported a ringing pressure in the head, like being underwater. A respiratory specialist briefly forgot which hand held the oxygen mask. Medical imaging escalated confusion. The CT scan showed no brain trauma, no signs of viral or parasitic invasion, yet the system flagged an anomaly in the temporal lobe, pixels that registered motion despite the image being static. Technicians recalibrated the machine 3 times. The anomaly remained. Neurologist Dr. Ramirez noted the reading resembled not internal damage, but interference, like something external was trying to interact at the point of cognitive recognition. His statement was never officially added to the report. At 1:47, while preparing for MRI evaluation, Daniel regained partial awareness. He did not open his eyes, but his voice emerged abruptly, fragmented. "Not in here. Walls. Listening." The words sounded strained, almost defensive. A nurse asked what he meant, but Daniel suddenly convulsed. For roughly 8 seconds, the heart monitor displayed no numerical readout, only static lines, while every overhead light dimmed simultaneously throughout the trauma wing. No emergency generator activated, and yet power returned, without any electrical record marking an interruption. Security footage from the hallway outside Daniel's room captured staff reacting to the dimming lights. But inside the room, the camera feed cut out for exactly 81 frames. When playback realigned, Daniel's bed had shifted 3 inches toward the wall. His limbs remained positioned as before, with no detectable movement in between. That was when hospital staff asked Expedition X members if they had encountered electromagnetic exposure. Phil hesitated before answering. "No," he said. "It wasn't the environment. It was following him." Once Daniel was stabilized under observation, producers instructed the Expedition X team to pull all field files from the last 48 hours for internal review. The mandate was quiet and urgent. No calls, no email trails. Jessica and Phil locked themselves in the on-site production vault to begin examining the raw data, with Josh Gates phoning in from a separate location. The objective was simple: isolate anything that suggested liability or negligence. But as they initiated footage transfer onto a secure system with no external network access, the first indication something had gone wrong appeared. Despite the drive being formatted 20 minutes earlier, a time-stamped folder labeled Repeat 0719 was already present. Phil swore he hadn't copied anything yet. Inside the folder were fragments of recorded audio and short video loops, some no longer than 5 seconds, showing the exact moment Daniel first stepped into the ravine. In the clips, the environment appeared normal, except for faint distortions at the edges of the screen, like the atmosphere was compressing inward. Each loop ended with the same distorted whisper overlaying the background static. "Do not come back alone." They deleted the folder. Within seconds, it reappeared. Jessica wiped the drive entirely, disconnected power, and rebooted the workstation. Not only did the folder remain, it had multiplied, now displayed in alphabetical sequence, each titled Repeat, followed by different time markers not associated with the expedition. Some timestamps didn't align with any recorded material. Others referenced future times, dates, and hours yet to occur. They ran diagnostics. No malware, no file corruption. The files existed without logical creation sources. When they played one of the future timestamp clips, the video displayed their production room at night, filmed from inside. A chair sat in the corner, empty. In the reflection of the cabinet glass, however, a blurred humanoid figure stood behind the chair, unmoving. The date stamp indicated 2 nights from now. Josh, still on the line, went silent for 6 seconds before saying, "Pull the tapes, lock the vault. Don't watch anything else until someone higher up decides what we do." That instruction came too late, because the next time Jessica touched the monitor, the screen flickered and showed a frame she did not remember recording. Daniel's hospital room. The same whisper. It followed him. By the following morning, the atmosphere on site had completely shifted. Jessica arrived at base camp visibly shaken, clutching a printed copy of one of the future timestamp scenes. According to field logs, she didn't sleep. Phil had already contacted internal safety advisors, filing a detailed incident report that described Daniel's collapse as neurological trauma, possibly induced by environmental interference. The team pushed to suspend all filming immediately and return equipment to headquarters for full technical analysis. They argued that if the anomaly somehow affected physiological harm, the crew could be in imminent danger. That request lasted less than 15 minutes. The network's executive liaison joined the call and dismissed the stop-work proposal. According to Jessica's later interview, the exec stated directly that the footage could represent the highest engagement point in the show's history, and hinted that they were already drafting a teaser for upcoming episodes. The fact that the physical injury occurred mid-expedition only made the episode more compelling. Phil immediately objected, reminding them that Daniel was under medical care and might face lasting cognitive damage. The response? "You're being emotional. This is the risk of immersive investigation. Audiences understand that." The team was furious. Josh Gates, patched into the call from Los Angeles, reportedly went silent for several moments before firmly repeating the request to halt the expedition entirely. The network escalated instead, citing contractual obligations and insurance coverage, and instructed them to complete the last 3 field segments before withdrawal. They even assigned a remote marketing representative to begin condensing the hospital incident into potential promotional cuts, ignoring objections from medical staff. Jessica later admitted the most chilling part wasn't the exec's decision. It was the slight audio glitch that occurred right after the call ended. The power flickered inside the production tent. Every camera indicator light turned red for 3 seconds, as if they all started recording simultaneously, unprompted. When techs tried to review that moment later, no cameras registered having captured anything at all. That's when Phil quietly said, "It knows we're still here." And nobody disagreed. Daniel remained unresponsive for nearly 12 hours after being airlifted to a temporary treatment facility outside the forest zone. Medical tests failed to show signs of concussion, infection, or seizure. His vitals were stable, yet he wouldn't wake. It wasn't until late afternoon, just as the team packed gear to leave, that he suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't seem confused or disoriented, but disturbingly calm. According to Jessica, the room temperature dropped the moment he looked at her. He didn't recognize anyone else in the tent, not even the paramedics. He whispered something so faint she had to lean close to hear it. It watched me fall, then waited to see who would come help. His voice sounded normal, but the words didn't. Jessica stepped back instinctively. Phil asked him what he meant, but Daniel only continued, "It's figuring out who's the next one." Then he stared past them. Not at a wall, not at ceiling, but at an empty corner of the tent where nothing stood. He began smiling, small at first, then unnaturally wide, as if trying to imitate the expression rather than showing real emotion. Moments later, alarms sounded throughout the medical tent. Every monitor attached to him displayed rapid spikes, not dangerous, but synchronized, as if responding to an external pattern rather than his physical state. The lights flickered once, twice, then power cut entirely for exactly 11 seconds. When it came back, Daniel had closed his eyes. He wasn't unconscious. He was sleeping peacefully, as if nothing happened. Within the hour, production leadership ordered a site-wide withdrawal. Not a pause, not a health and safety hold, an immediate evacuation. All footage related to the event was flagged maximum level containment, never to air. Internal reports concluded that unidentified environmental influence was responsible. The final note added by the network compliance officer was only 3 words long: footage not usable. But those who were there still insist it wasn't because the footage was corrupted. It was because it was too clear.
Josh Gates just walked away from Expedition X. No warning, no explanation to fans, just a cryptic statement about prioritizing his safety and his family. And now rumors are circulating about what might have happened during their most recent filming expedition. Reports of an incident involving a Bigfoot-like creature in the Pacific Northwest, claims that something left the most fearless explorer on television genuinely shaken. Now let's be clear, nothing is confirmed at this moment. Discovery hasn't released official details. The crew is staying silent, but alleged insider sources have been sharing details that, if true, would explain everything. Subscribe and hit the bell because we're breaking down every rumor, alleged detail, and claimed insider account about what may have happened during that expedition. According to circulating rumors, it happened 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be a standard Expedition X investigation. The team was allegedly filming in a remote area of Washington state, following up on recent Bigfoot sightings reported by local forestry workers. Multiple witnesses, consistent descriptions, fresh footprints documented by credible sources. Exactly the kind of case Josh has built his career investigating. Claims suggest the team consisted of Josh, his co-host Jessica Chobot, Phil Torres, and a production crew of 8 people. They'd reportedly set up base camp in a valley known for decades of Sasquatch activity. By all alleged accounts, the first 2 days were productive but unremarkable. Footprints supposedly found and documented, strange vocalizations allegedly recorded at distance. Then came the 3rd night. According to unverified sources, Josh and Phil decided to investigate an area about 2 miles from base camp where thermal drones had allegedly detected heat signatures. Jessica reportedly stayed behind to monitor equipment. The plan was supposedly simple: hike in, document whatever they found, return by midnight. Rumor has it they never made it to midnight. At 10:47 p.m., base camp allegedly received a frantic radio transmission from Josh. The audio was reportedly chaotic. Claims suggest certain words came through: contact, close, moving fast, Phil's injured. Then the transmission allegedly cut to static. When communication supposedly resumed, Josh's voice was different, shaken, urgent, allegedly calling for immediate evacuation. According to these reports, the production coordinator sent the entire crew to extract Josh and Phil. What they allegedly found was equipment scattered, Phil on the ground with what's claimed to be a head wound, and Josh standing guard, reportedly refusing to move until the entire group was together. But here's where the rumors get interesting. The cameras were allegedly still rolling. Everything that supposedly happened was reportedly captured on multiple devices. And what those cameras allegedly captured, according to anonymous sources claiming to have seen footage, would be the most compelling Bigfoot evidence ever recorded, if true, if any of this actually happened. And these rumors suggest Josh Gates, a man who's spent 2 decades exploring over 100 countries, investigating everything from lost treasures to paranormal phenomena, decided he's done. Not with television, not with exploration, but allegedly with putting himself in situations where he might encounter something like what was reportedly in those woods, because according to these unconfirmed claims, whatever he supposedly saw wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was a threat to be survived. We need to be clear. We haven't seen this footage ourselves. Discovery allegedly has it locked down tight, but we've heard from sources claiming to have viewed it, and their descriptions, if accurate, are disturbing. What follows is based on those unconfirmed accounts. The footage allegedly begins normally. Josh and Phil hiking through dense forest at night. Standard narration. Phil supposedly scanning with thermal imaging. Around the 18-minute mark, Phil allegedly gets a thermal hit. Something large, approximately 400 yards ahead. They reportedly discuss approaching, and Josh makes the decision to close the gap carefully. As they allegedly get closer, the thermal signature supposedly becomes clearer, upright, bipedal. At approximately 200 yards, sources claim the figure stops and turns toward them. Not slowly, but deliberately. Phil allegedly says, "I think it knows we're here." Josh's rumored response, "Good, let's see if it'll show itself." This is allegedly when things go wrong. Instead of fleeing, the thermal signature reportedly begins approaching them fast. Sources describe the speed as terrifying given the dense terrain. Josh supposedly makes the call to back out immediately. They start retreating, but the figure allegedly keeps gaining ground. Then comes what sources describe as a vocalization, allegedly loud, complex, and close. Both men visibly react according to claims, stopping their retreat. In those seconds, the gap supposedly closes to within 50 yards. Then, according to reports, an object flies past Josh's head. A rock, later identified as approximately softball-sized, allegedly impacts a tree with enough force to embed in the bark. Both men allegedly go to ground, and sources claim that with cameras at ground level, they capture something. All three sources describe this the same way, if their accounts are true. Clear footage for approximately 4 to 5 seconds, not thermal. Direct view, illuminated by camera lights, of something large, covered in reddish-brown hair, with a face showing features that allegedly don't match any known primate, and eyes that supposedly reflect the camera light. The figure then allegedly moves laterally, circling their position. Phil supposedly tries to track it with thermal. Josh is reportedly reaching for rocks. The circling continues for 30-40 seconds according to claims. Then another rock, allegedly larger, comes from a different direction. It reportedly strikes Phil on the side of the head, dropping him immediately. Josh allegedly goes to Phil and makes the radio call for help, while the thermal camera supposedly still shows that massive heat signature maintaining position, watching them. The standoff allegedly continues for nearly 2 minutes before the figure moves away, but thermal signatures reportedly remain at the edge of detection range, as if it was watching to ensure they left. Phil Torres required immediate medical attention. The rock that struck him left a laceration that needed 12 stitches and caused a concussion significant enough that he was hospitalized overnight for observation. But it's not the severity of the injury that's remarkable, it's the circumstances and the projectile itself. The rock was recovered from the scene, a smooth river stone weighing approximately 4 pounds, the kind of rock you'd find in a riverbed, not typically lying around on a forest floor, which raises an immediate question: where did it come from? Wildlife doesn't carry rocks. Bears don't throw objects. The presence of that specific type of stone in that location suggests it was brought there deliberately, but more concerning is the throwing mechanics required to cause the injury Phil sustained. A biomechanics expert consulted by the production estimated that to throw a 4-pound rock with enough force to cause that level of injury from a distance of approximately 40-50 feet requires strength beyond normal human capability. The throwing motion would also need to be coordinated and aimed, not a random toss. Rock throwing is actually well documented in Bigfoot encounter reports. It's considered a signature behavior, territorial warning behavior reported consistently across different geographic regions and different time periods. Researchers theorize it serves as a way to establish dominance and warn intruders without direct physical confrontation. The fact that Phil was injured by a thrown rock fits perfectly into established Bigfoot behavioral patterns. Phil's medical records document the injury, but the official incident report filed with Discovery Channel is deliberately vague about the cause. It states he was struck by a falling object during nighttime investigation in rough terrain. No mention of the rock being thrown, no reference to the encounter, just carefully worded language designed to minimize liability while technically being truthful. Phil himself has been completely silent about the incident. He hasn't posted on social media about Expedition X since it happened. When reached by fans asking about the injury, his responses have been vague. Accident during filming, recovering well, thanks for the concern. The kind of responses that say nothing while appearing to say something. something. But sources close to Phil say he's struggling with what happened. Not just physically, the concussion symptoms resolved within a week, but psychologically. Phil is a scientist. He's an entomologist and biologist who approaches investigations with academic rigor, having an experience that defies his scientific understanding of what's possible in North American wilderness has been profoundly disorienting. The injury serves as physical proof that something happened. Medical records don't lie. A 4-pound river stone embedded in the bark of a tree doesn't appear by accident, and Phil's concussion isn't a psychological reaction or misperception. Something with significant strength threw a heavy object with enough accuracy and force to injure a human being. That's not folklore. That's documented fact. Phil Torres allegedly required immediate medical attention. According to claims, the rock that struck him left a laceration requiring 12 stitches and caused a concussion significant enough for overnight hospitalization. But reports suggest it's not the severity that's remarkable, it's the circumstances and the projectile itself. The rock was supposedly recovered from the scene. Sources describe it as a smooth river stone weighing approximately 4 pounds, the kind you'd find in a riverbed, not typically on a forest floor, which allegedly raises an immediate question. Where did it come from? Wildlife doesn't carry rocks. Bears don't throw objects. But according to rumors, what's more concerning is the throwing mechanics required. A biomechanics expert allegedly consulted by production estimated that throwing a 4-pound rock with enough force to cause Phil's injury from 40-50 feet requires strength beyond normal human capability. The throw would also need to be coordinated and aimed, not random. Rock throwing is actually well documented in Bigfoot encounter reports, researchers note. It's considered signature territorial behavior reported consistently across different regions and time periods. If true, the fact that Phil was injured by a thrown rock fits perfectly into established Bigfoot behavioral patterns that have been claimed for decades. Phil's alleged medical records document the injury, but sources claim the official incident report filed with Discovery is deliberately vague. It supposedly states he was struck by a falling object during nighttime investigation in rough terrain. No mention of throwing, no reference to any encounter, just carefully worded language designed to minimize liability. According to circulating reports, the rescue team that responded consisted of Jessica Chobot, 3 camera operators, 2 producers, and the production coordinator. 8 people total, and rumors suggest every single one of them allegedly saw something during the extraction. As they supposedly approached Josh and Phil's location, claims suggest they began hearing vocalizations, not the single scream from the initial encounter, but ongoing calls that seemed to come from multiple directions. Sources describe it as if they were being tracked by more than one individual, coordinating movements around them. Jessica, allegedly leading the group, reportedly made the decision to keep everyone together in tight formation. They moved as a unit, lights sweeping the forest, and according to claims, multiple cameras captured heat signatures on thermal, not just one, at least 3 distinct figures visible at various points during the hike. When they supposedly reached Josh and Phil, thermal cameras allegedly showed something disturbing. The signatures that had been tracking the rescue party had converged on their position. They were surrounded, according to reports, not closely but in a clear pattern around their location. The production coordinator allegedly made an immediate decision: extract and evacuate. No investigating. They helped Phil up and started back, and claims suggest those thermal signatures paced them the entire way back, maintaining distance but clearly following. Multiple crew members allegedly reported seeing eyeshine, eyes catching light at distances and heights that suggested something large. Not deer, not bears, something else watching them leave, if these accounts are to be believed. One camera operator, supposedly speaking anonymously, described it as the most frightening experience in 15 years of filming. Not individual moments, but the totality, the coordinated behavior, the persistent following, the sense that they were being allowed to leave rather than escape. Josh Gates has been remarkably quiet about his specific reasons for leaving Expedition X. His official statement was brief: "After much consideration, I've decided to step away from Expedition X to focus on other projects and spend more time with my family." Standard departure language that reveals nothing. But according to rumors, people close to Josh tell a different story. The alleged Washington State incident supposedly shook him in ways previous close calls never did. Reports suggest he keeps asking, what if Phil had been killed? The rock that allegedly struck him could have hit differently, could have caused a fatal injury. And Josh has 2 young children at home, a wife who reportedly worries every time he goes on expedition. Claims suggest there's also a philosophical component. If Bigfoot exists, these rumors say, it's not just an exciting discovery, it's potentially a predator, a territorial animal with capabilities that make it genuinely dangerous. And sources allege Josh realized that chasing that mystery isn't adventure anymore. It's risk he's supposedly no longer willing to take. According to these unconfirmed reports, Josh isn't retiring from television or exploration. He's allegedly still hosting Expedition Unknown, which focuses on historical mysteries and archaeological investigations. But claims suggest he's done with active paranormal investigation that involves going into remote areas looking for creatures that might pose serious threats. If these rumors are accurate, Discovery Channel allegedly finds itself in an unprecedented situation. They supposedly have footage that would generate massive ratings, clear documentation of a Bigfoot encounter involving their most recognizable host. From a business perspective, airing this would allegedly be a ratings goldmine, but according to claims, they also have a serious liability problem. One crew member was allegedly injured seriously enough to require hospitalization. If they air footage explicitly confirming their crew was attacked by an unknown creature, sources suggest they open themselves to questions about duty of care and safety protocols. Insurance is supposedly another consideration. Production insurance for adventure shows already comes with significant premiums. If insurers allegedly determine Discovery knowingly sent crews into dangerous situations, it could affect coverage not just for Expedition X, but for their entire slate of adventure programs, according to industry observers. Then there's allegedly the question of responsibility. If Discovery airs footage they believe genuinely documents a Bigfoot encounter, they're essentially taking a position that Bigfoot exists. According to speculation, that carries implications beyond ratings, potentially triggering scientific investigation or government inquiries. Sources claim the network has been in discussions with wildlife experts, legal counsel, and possibly even government agencies. Some executives allegedly push to air it, while others advocate for keeping it archived. A compromise position supposedly being discussed involves releasing heavily edited footage with extensive disclaimers. But Josh's decision to quit allegedly complicates everything. If Discovery airs the episode after Josh left citing safety concerns, it creates a narrative that the network prioritized ratings over host safety, according to media analysts. Josh's departure supposedly gives him leverage in how this footage might be presented. The current status, according to rumors, is that Discovery has delayed the entire season. The official explanation is production schedule adjustments, but speculation suggests they're buying time to figure out how to handle this alleged episode and what it means for the show's future. As of now, if this footage exists, it allegedly remains in Discovery's possession, unaired and inaccessible. According to claims, multiple parties have requested access. Bigfoot researchers have supposedly offered to sign NDAs. Scientists have allegedly expressed interest in analyzing the thermal imaging. Even government wildlife agencies have reportedly inquired. Discovery has allegedly refused all requests. The official position, according to sources, is that any footage is part of ongoing production. But rumors suggest the network simply hasn't decided what to do with it. Legal counsel is supposedly advising caution while executives weigh risks and benefits. Some researchers allegedly argue Discovery has a moral obligation to release footage this significant, if it exists and is as compelling as claimed. Keeping it suppressed would prioritize corporate liability over potential scientific advancement. But the counter-argument is that Discovery owns any footage and has every right to make business decisions about release. There's also supposedly the question of physical evidence. The rocks allegedly thrown were reportedly collected. Phil's medical records supposedly document injuries from a thrown object. Crew members allegedly provided statement. All of this evidence would exist independent of video footage, but without Discovery releasing it to researchers, it remains isolated and unverifiable, according to claim. Leaks are theoretically possible. If the footage exists on multiple hard drives and has been viewed by numerous people, someone could potentially release it anonymously, though doing so would likely end their career and could expose them to legal consequences. But speculation suggests the temptation must be significant for people who believe this could change how science views Bigfoot. The most likely outcome, according to industry observers, is that Discovery will eventually air a heavily edited version. They'd allegedly include enough to acknowledge something happened while carefully editing around the most explicit sequences. Expert analysts would provide alternative explanations. Disclaimers would emphasize the unusual nature of the incident. Let's be absolutely clear about what we know for certain. Josh Gates has left Expedition X. That's confirmed. Phil Torres was allegedly injured during filming. That appears to be true based on his absence from social media and project schedules. Discovery has delayed the season. Also confirmed. Everything else, the details of the encounter, the footage descriptions, the crew reactions, remains unverified rumor and speculation. But rumors this consistent from multiple alleged sources suggest something significant happened. Whether it was exactly as described, we can't say. Whether footage as compelling as claimed actually exists, we don't know. But Josh's departure from a successful show speaks volumes. People people don't walk away from careers like his without serious reasons. If even half of these rumors prove true, it represents a fundamental shift in paranormal investigation, from entertainment to genuine risk, from mystery to potential danger. The footage may eventually air, the full story may eventually be told, or this may remain one of television's most intriguing unsolved mysteries, whispered about but never fully confirmed. For now, we're left with questions. What really happened in those Washington woods? What did the cameras actually capture? And why did Josh Gates, one of television's most fearless explorers, decide some mysteries aren't worth solving? Until Discovery releases official information or Josh breaks his silence, we can only piece together the rumors and wonder what truth they might contain. Sometimes the most compelling evidence is what people choose not to show you. Jessica Chobot didn't disappear from Expedition X with an announcement or a goodbye. One season she was there, steady, fearless, asking the questions viewers trusted. Then suddenly, she was gone. No explanation, no farewell episode, just silence. Officially, it was a creative shift, but people who worked behind the scenes say that story doesn't come close to the truth, because Jessica wasn't just a host. She was the one slowing things down when the danger escalated. The one questioning edits that didn't match what really happened in the field, and the one who reportedly pushed back when investigations crossed a line from discovery into risk for spectacle. Tonight, we're unpacking what led to her quiet exit, the investigation that changed everything, and why some footage may never be seen. If you value stories that go deeper than the surface narrative, hit subscribe now, because what happened here wasn't just a departure, it was a warning. Before her departure became a quiet mystery, Jessica Chobot was the emotional and intellectual anchor of Expedition X. She wasn't just a host reacting to strange locations or unexplained events. She was the connective tissue between the investigation and the audience. While others focused on instruments and theories, Jessica focused on context, human impact, and what the evidence actually meant. That balance is what made viewers trust her. From the earliest episodes, crew members noticed something different about how she worked. When cameras stopped rolling, she didn't disappear to reset for the next scene. She stayed. She reviewed audio logs, rewatched thermal footage, and asked for raw data instead of highlight reels. According to multiple people who worked in production, Jessica was the only on-camera talent who regularly requested access to uncut material after investigations wrapped. Not because she wanted more screen time, but because she wanted to understand what really happened. Her background mattered here. Jessica came into Expedition X with years of experience in investigative media, not just paranormal entertainment. She understood how easily a narrative could drift away from facts once editing began. That awareness made her cautious in ways others weren't. She often questioned whether a reaction shot truly reflected the moment it was attached to, or whether an equipment malfunction was being framed too mysteriously for what it actually was. This didn't make her difficult. It made her precise. Crew members have said she rarely raised her voice or caused confrontation. Instead, she asked quiet, uncomfortable questions. Why did this cut remove the evacuation discussion? Why wasn't this safety concern mentioned on camera? Why does this moment feel bigger in the edit than it felt in real time? As the show gained popularity, those questions became more frequent and more inconvenient. Jessica believed the strength of Expedition X wasn't fear, but credibility. She wanted the audience to feel uncertainty without manipulation, tension without exaggeration. That philosophy shaped her on-screen presence. Calm, grounded, observant. She didn't need to dramatize the unknown. She respected it. But that same commitment began to place her at odds with the direction the show was quietly moving toward. Because as ratings grew, so did the pressure to escalate. And Jessica was standing directly in the way of that escalation. What started as dedication would soon be viewed as resistance. And that resistance, whether she realized it or not, was already putting her on the outside. As Expedition X grew in popularity, the tone of the series began to shift in subtle but important ways. What had started as a careful investigation-first program slowly leaned toward faster pacing, higher stakes, and moments designed to feel more intense on screen. To most viewers, the change was almost invisible, but behind the scenes, it was impossible to miss. Production meetings increasingly focused on energy, impact, and payoff. Episodes needed stronger hooks and more dramatic beats to compete in a crowded paranormal television landscape. According to multiple crew accounts, she was one of the first to question whether the show was drifting away from its original purpose. She didn't object to tension or suspense. What bothered her was when the narrative began to move faster than the evidence. In meetings, she reportedly asked whether certain moments were being emphasized because they were meaningful or because they played better on camera. Those questions didn't always land well. Jessica noticed that reaction shots were sometimes prioritized over analysis, and that equipment anomalies were framed more ominously in post-production than they felt in the field. Nothing was fabricated outright, but the tone was being sharpened. Uncertainty was being nudged toward implication. She pushed back quietly at first, asking for context to be added, requesting that disclaimers stay in place, suggesting that viewers deserved to know when something was unresolved rather than hinted at as definitive. To her, ambiguity wasn't a weakness, it was honesty. Field operations changed too. Investigations were occasionally extended longer than planned, not because new data was coming in, but because the episode still needed a climax. Crew members later said Jessica was often the one checking safety protocols repeatedly, confirming exit plans, and questioning why they were staying when conditions were deteriorating. One technician recalled her asking a simple question during a late-night shoot: "If nothing else happens tonight, are we okay with that?" The silence that followed told her everything. Behind the scenes, her insistence on restraint began to stand out. She wasn't refusing to investigate. She was refusing to exaggerate. And in a production environment increasingly shaped by ratings pressure, that distinction mattered. What once made Jessica invaluable, her commitment to accuracy and caution, was slowly being reframed as hesitation, as friction, as someone not fully aligned with where the show was heading. And that tension would soon stop being theoretical, because one investigation would force everything into the open and make it impossible for her to keep going as if nothing had changed. According to multiple people close to production, the moment everything changed for Jessica Chobot happened during an investigation that never aired in its original form. On paper, it was a standard assignment. A remote site with reports of unexplained activity, environmental instability, and electromagnetic interference. The kind of location Expedition X had handled before. But this time, the risks weren't theoretical. From the start, Jessica expressed concerns about the environment itself: structural instability, unreliable communications, and a lack of clear emergency access made the location unusually dangerous. She flagged the site as high risk and requested additional safeguards before filming continued. Those requests were acknowledged and then quietly deprioritized. The pressure to proceed came down to one thing: the episode needed something to happen. As the team moved deeper into the investigation, equipment began behaving erratically. Readings spiked without explanation. Audio feeds dropped in and out. Crew members later described sudden dizziness, disorientation, and a strange sensation of pressure that none of them could easily explain. While these moments were unsettling, what disturbed Jessica most was how quickly they were reframed as atmosphere rather than warning signs. At one point, a piece of equipment failed in a way that caused a brief but serious safety incident. No one was badly hurt, but it was close enough to leave an impression. Jessica was reportedly the first to call for a pause, insisting they stop and assess before continuing. Cameras were still rolling. Later that night, she reviewed the raw footage alone. What she saw didn't match how the incident was being discussed. Thermal anomalies appeared in the same moments the equipment failed. Audio distortions coincided with physical effects on the crew. Whether it was environmental, technical, or something unknown didn't matter. What mattered was that it wasn't being treated with the seriousness it deserved. The next morning, Jessica confronted production leadership. She didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. She asked a direct question instead. Were they documenting what happened or reshaping it into something more dramatic than truthful? The response, according to insiders, was carefully neutral. The episode would be edited responsibly. Safety would be addressed internally. The narrative would be adjusted. That answer didn't reassure her. It confirmed her fear. For the first time, Jessica realized the issue wasn't a single investigation. It was the system deciding which parts of reality were convenient enough to show. And in that moment, she understood something else too. If she stayed, she would eventually be asked to stand in front of the camera and support a version of events she didn't believe in. And that was a line she wasn't willing to cross. After the investigation that raised serious alarms for Jessica Chobot, she expected a period of reflection, a review of what went wrong, how close the crew had come to real danger, and whether the episode should even move forward. Instead, what followed was something far more unsettling. When the first rough cuts began circulating, Jessica noticed immediately that key moments were missing. The pauses she had called for, the discussions about evacuation, the uncertainty in the data, all of it had been trimmed or reframed. What remained was a cleaner, more dramatic version of events, one that suggested tension without fully acknowledging risk. According to one post-production staffer, entire segments where Jessica questioned whether they should continue filming were marked as non-essential. Audio clips documenting crew discomfort were shortened. The equipment failure was labeled as a minor malfunction rather than a warning sign. The episode still worked as television, but it no longer worked as truth. Jessica didn't confront anyone emotionally. She went to the editing room and asked for the cut logs. When she reviewed them, she noticed something disturbing. Certain clips had been flagged for removal before the full debrief even took place. That meant decisions about what not to show were being made before the investigation had been properly analyzed. She raised this in a production call, asking why moments related to safety and uncertainty were being softened. The answer she received was careful, corporate, and revealing. Those elements were too alarming for the tone of the series. They could create unnecessary fear or imply liability. To Jessica, that reasoning missed the point entirely. If something was alarming, it deserved context, not concealment. If an investigation pushed people into danger, viewers had a right to know. Her analytical segments were shortened. More narration was shifted elsewhere. On screen, nothing appeared wrong. Off screen, she felt herself being managed. Crew members noticed it too. One assistant editor later said it felt like Jessica was being protected from herself, shielded from having too much influence over the final story. Not because she was wrong, but because she was inconvenient. This wasn't censorship in the obvious sense. It was filtration. Reality passed through a lens designed to preserve tone rather than truth. For Jessica, that realization was heavier than fear of the unknown. She could accept unanswered questions. What she couldn't accept was pretending certainty where none existed, or glossing over risk for the sake of a cleaner episode. And once she saw how easily reality could be reshaped in post-production, she knew the problem wasn't going to fix itself. The show wasn't just documenting the unexplained anymore. It was managing it. That understanding quietly pushed her closer to a decision she hadn't yet spoken out loud, but was already forming. In the weeks following the disputed edit, Jessica Chobot's concerns shifted from storytelling to something more serious: crew safety. What had once felt like occasional risk began to look like a pattern. Longer shoots in unstable locations. Fewer buffers built into filming schedules. Decisions increasingly justified by how well a moment might land with the audience. Jessica started asking different questions, not about ratings or pacing, but about response times, about backup plans, about what would happen if someone got hurt in a place emergency services couldn't reach quickly. According to a crew medic, she once asked bluntly how many minutes it would take to extract an injured team member from a remote site if something collapsed. When she heard the answer, she reportedly fell silent. Production leadership didn't ignore her outright, but her concerns were framed as caution bordering on overreaction. After all, nothing catastrophic had happened yet. The show had always pushed into difficult environments. That was part of its identity. Jessica disagreed. She believed that survival so far didn't justify increasing risk. During planning sessions for future investigations, she began flagging sites as unacceptable unless additional safeguards were added. Extra personnel, redundant communications, more conservative access limits. These requests were often met with budget constraints and time pressure. The message was clear, even if it was never stated directly. The show needed to stay agile. One meeting in particular stuck with her. A producer reportedly described a high-risk location as worth it if something finally breaks open. Jessica responded quietly, asking whether something breaking open included people. The room went still. After that, her role subtly changed. She was still respected, still on camera, but increasingly excluded from early planning conversations. Decisions were being made before she entered the room. By the time she raised concerns, the logistics were already locked in. Crew members later said it felt like two priorities were colliding. One side focused on discovery and responsibility, the other focused on momentum. What made this moment critical was that Jessica wasn't asking to stop investigating. She was asking to slow down when the line between exploration and danger blurred. To her, the unknown deserved respect, not pressure. Privately, she began confiding in a small number of colleagues that she felt the show was approaching a breaking point, not because of what they might find, but because of how far they were willing to go looking for it. That tension wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, professional, controlled, and that's what made it so dangerous. Because once safety becomes negotiable, the decision to step away stops being emotional. It becomes inevitable. The moment Jessica Chobot realized she couldn't continue didn't happen during a dramatic confrontation or a dangerous incident in the field. It happened in a conference room. During a routine production briefing for an upcoming investigation, logistics were being finalized for a remote location with known structural instability. Jessica had already reviewed the latest environmental assessments and flagged the area as high risk. She recommended additional additional personnel, and stricter limits on how far the team should go once inside. The response she received wasn't hostile. It was procedural. The budget wouldn't allow it. The schedule couldn't support delays. The team would adapt as needed. Then someone said it. The investigation needed proximity. The episode needed stakes. Jessica didn't argue. She listened, and in that moment, she understood that the calculation had shifted. Risk was no longer something to be minimized. It was something being weighed against entertainment value. Later that evening, she returned to her hotel and began organizing her notes. Not dramatically, methodically, field journals, emails, planning documents. She drafted a message requesting a pause in filming until safety standards and narrative boundaries could be reviewed. When the response came back, it was polite and firm. The show was moving forward. That was enough. Jessica didn't walk away out of fear or frustration. She walked away because staying would mean accepting a system where caution was treated as an obstacle. She wasn't willing to be the face of something she couldn't stand behind. 2 days later, she made the call. She would step back from filming. No public conflict, no accusations, just a line drawn quietly and permanently. And with that decision, Expedition X lost more than a host. It lost the person who had been asking whether the mission was still worth the cost. Jessica Chobot's departure didn't create chaos overnight. It created silence. On the surface, Expedition X continued. Episodes aired, investigations moved forward. Viewers were told it was a normal transition. But behind the scenes, crew members say the atmosphere shifted immediately. Meetings grew shorter. Safety discussions became streamlined instead of thorough. Decisions that once involved debate now moved quickly, often without pushback. Several longtime staff noticed that the questions Jessica used to ask were no longer being asked at all. Why are we pushing deeper? What happens if this goes wrong? Are we documenting something real or framing something dramatic? Without her in the room, those pauses disappeared. Not because the answers had improved, but because no one was pressing for them anymore. Editors later admitted that the tone of episodes subtly changed. More emphasis on reactions, less on uncertainty. Moments that would have once been framed as inconclusive were now allowed to sit closer to implication. Nothing fabricated, just a shift in balance. One crew member described it this way: before, we were investigating first and filming second. After she left, we were filming first and justifying it later. Jessica didn't publicly criticize the show. She didn't hint at wrongdoing. But people noticed that when asked about Expedition X in interviews, she spoke carefully. She praised the team, she respected the work, but she never spoke about the investigations the way she once had. Privately, she stayed in touch with certain crew members. When asked if she regretted leaving, her answer was always the same. "I miss the mission," she said. "I don't miss what it was becoming." Her absence didn't expose a scandal. It revealed a vacuum, and in that vacuum, the show kept going, just without the voice that had been slowing it down before it crossed the line. After stepping away, Jessica Chobot never released a tell-all. There was no expose, no podcast tour, no dramatic reveal, but people close to her say the most important things she discovered were never meant to become public footage anyway. During her final seasons, Jessica began privately documenting moments that didn't make it into episodes, not because they were unbelievable, but because they were uncomfortable. Times when the data didn't match the narrative, when equipment failures were ordinary, but later framed as something more, when fear was amplified not by the unknown, but by editing choices. She believes some mysteries lose meaning the moment they're pushed too hard. One former field researcher said Jessica kept a separate notebook during investigations, not for theories, but for boundary, places where she felt continuing would cross from exploration into provocation. She rarely spoke about it openly, but she made quiet notes when she felt the team was pressing an environment too aggressively, or when local warnings were treated as atmosphere rather than information. There was one investigation she reportedly refused to reshoot segments for, not because something terrifying happened, but because nothing happened at all. The readings were flat, the environment was stable, and she felt recreating tension would be dishonest. That footage was eventually reshaped without her involvement. That moment stuck with her. Jessica wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was wary of certainty, of pretending to understand things that might never offer clean answers. To her, the real danger wasn't what lurked in the dark. It was what happens when curiosity becomes entitlement. After leaving, she told a colleague something that never aired anywhere. Some places don't need to be solved. They need to be respected. What she refused to put on camera wasn't evidence. It was the moment when exploration turns into intrusion. And once she felt that line had blurred, she knew stepping away was the only honest choice left. Jessica Chobot didn't leave Expedition X with accusations or controversy. She left with restraint, and that restraint is exactly why her departure still echoes through the show today. In an industry driven by escalation, walking away quietly quietly is often more disruptive than making noise. Jessica didn't expose secrets. She didn't leak footage. She simply removed herself from a process she no longer believed could stay honest. That choice forced an uncomfortable question, not just for the show, but for the entire genre. How far should investigation go before it stops being investigation? Since her exit, paranormal television has continued to grow louder, faster, and more extreme. Higher stake, bigger claim, less patience for uncertainty. In that environment, Jessica's absence feels deliberate, almost instructional. She showed that credibility isn't built by chasing answers at any cost. It's built by knowing when to stop asking. Crew members who worked with her still reference the Jessica check, a phrase used informally when discussing risk or narrative framing. It means asking whether a moment is being shown because it matters, or because it plays well on screen. Even now, her influence lingers in the margins. Jessica never said the show crossed a dangerous line, but she didn't have to. Her decision did the talking. When viewers ask why she left, the answer isn't hidden footage or paranormal terror. It's something far more unsettling. She saw where the road was heading, and she chose not to walk it. That's why her exit wasn't an ending. It was a warning, and the fact that it was delivered in silence may be the most honest thing she ever did on camera.